Thank you, nephew of the tree. One silver lining coming out of COVID has been an appreciation of who the people we work with are beyond their jobs. The office masks instantly came down as soon as kids, puppies and half-naked partners appeared in the back screens of video calls while we were working from home. Today's session is about how we build on humanising our workplace with a focus on deeper, authentic connection by gifting ourselves the opportunity to better understand each other's story. And no culture in the world does a better job of storytelling and connection than Indigenous Australian culture. So we have a fantastic lineup today to learn from and take inspiration from. So first up, introducing Phil. Phil Moig is a passionate ally and is here to share her story, which has been heavily influenced by Aboriginal culture.
Thanks, Antonia. Hey guys, thanks for sticking with us. I know it's getting late in the arvo, so hopefully you've had your caffeine fix. So before I start, I just want to acknowledge that we're all coming together this arvo on Wurundjeri country, and that is the home of the people of the Kulin Nation. So everyone loves a good story, right? And before the written word, story was actually all that existed. So for over 100,000 years right here in Australia, story is how all of our knowledge, our wisdom, and actually the very meaning of life itself was passed down through generations. So there's something that we can learn from that today in how we choose to share our story. So I'm Philippa Moig, and this is my story. I'm not necessarily your average city girl. I'm from Sydney. I was fortunate enough to have a pretty privileged, educated upbringing, but ever since I was a little tacker, I'd always felt a really deep connection with the bush and a strong pull to be in the country. So at the age of 29, I left everything that I knew and loved. So my home, my friends, my family, this very industry that I love. And I went up north to become what us city slickers know as a Jillaroo. And that is someone who does the mustering and drafting of cattle on horseback and with the use of a chopper. And I did this in a place called Wave Hill. It's about 52 hours north of here. And this is a place of great historical significance for Aboriginal and all Australian history. It is a place where the fight for equality was real, and it was pinnacle in the start of the discussion around equal wages. So to get a sense of this place, I need for you to visualise for me a vast and largely untouched country. As you can see up here, the earth, it's red and it's rocky. And the trees, they're a beautiful shade of dark green. So can you feel the heat of what it is to have a 45-degree day? Can you hear the black cockatoos squawking as they fly overhead? And can you see a couple of saltwater crocs peppered up and down what is a 15-kilometre long driveway? So it was in this really remote place that I met a really proud Wurundjeri man, and his name was Adam. Adam had fair skin, blue eyes, could not be more proud of his Aboriginality, more proud of where he came from, his family, his connection to country, his connection to mob. And he and I, our worlds, they couldn't have been more different. But you guys know what they say, opposites attract, right? So fast forward with me now 10 years. And Adam and I, we're raising two proud Wurundjeri children together. They have fair skin, blue eyes, one has red hair, one has blonde hair, and they could not be more proud of their heritage. And this is because Aboriginality, it's never a percentage. For my kids, for mob, it is the deepest sense of their identity. It is who they are, it is their sense of connection to something far greater than themselves, back to mob. So my partnership with Adam, certainly it hasn't always been a smooth one, but it has changed my life. And it has completely opened my eyes to the power and the beauty and the discovery of Indigenous ways of being. So Aboriginal culture, that's now a part of my story. So learning from culture has been, for me as a leader, following the way of the elders, paying forward our knowledge, never gatekeeping it. As a mother, it has been connecting with a really ancient practice called Didiri, sitting in absolute stillness, quiet contemplation and self-reflection. So I share all of this with you because Aboriginal culture has shown me that the stories that matter most in our lives are about who we are. And that is really different to what we do. So what is it that each of you want to be remembered for? And what is the story that you will leave behind long after you have gone?
Thanks, Phil. I now have the pleasure of handing over to Warramai man, Dr. Paul Callaghan. Paul is a man who walks in both worlds. He's been incredibly successful by Western standards, having several qualifications, including obtaining a PhD, an author. If you haven't read The Dreaming Path, please look that up. Holding a CEO position across TAFE and leading thousands of people across complex organisations. But his greatest lessons and sense of leadership have come from going bush with elders.
With that song and with that dance, I've just shared story. And that song and that story that I've just shared with you is my acknowledgement of the old people that have walked this place, this country for 100,000 years. And for me, their spirits are with us today. They're with all of us and they're sharing with us, and I acknowledge them. So in thinking about what you do, I want you to take a moment to come out of that, and I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine a world with no poverty, a world with no hunger, a world with no homelessness. I want you to imagine a world with no armies, with no jails, a world where everybody grows up with everything they need to live a life of contentment, mind, body and spirit, where everybody lives to 90 to 100 years of age. Can you imagine a world like that? Can you? Most people say, no world like that. Never was, never will be. That's not true. The world you're thinking about is history in some aspects of the world, but in Aboriginal Australia, for 100,000 years, we had that world. People might say that can't be true, but it's true. We had a world where we had all that we needed. And the reason we had that is because of a thing in English called the law. The law in my language is the Nurumpa. And what the Nurumpa means in English is I must care for my place and all things in my place. Imagine a world if every morning we woke up and entrenched in our heart and in our work and in our life, we knew we were going to create a place where we cared for each other and we cared for country and all things in country. It'd be a pretty good world, hey? And so this is the challenge, this is the dreaming path, this is the way Aboriginal people lived. And the reason that worked, two big reasons. The power of relationships, the old people say, while the Western world built armies, we built relationships. So something for you to think about today is, how do I build more relationships? How do I do that? And the second thing to think about is the importance of story. Our old people have told story for hundreds of thousands of years. From when you're a baby bounced on a knee, you'd be told the story, Nuppachi, Nuppachi, I must always share, I must never be greedy. There's all these stories. And the old people say, when we leave this world behind, all we leave behind is our story. So make it the best story possible. That's multifaceted, and so I want to challenge you to think about that. What kind of story are you living? Are you living the best story possible? People might go, yeah, I'm living the best story possible. Are you living a busy story? Or are you living the best story? A lot of people go, busy equals best, yeah. And that's not true. People are fighting the clock all the time and you're rushing yourself to the grave. You're not living the best story. Some of you might be, I don't know. Think about that. Are you living a story full of vibrant colour, or are you living a story of monotone grey? Are you living a story that you choose? Are you walking your footsteps? Or are you walking the footsteps of other people's expectations? They're different things, and it's really important to unpack that. Also, the importance of story in terms of your organisation and your role. When a client comes to you, their story is there, and suddenly your name's in there, and so is your organisation. How's that going to read? Is it going to read really great for the next chapter because of your involvement? Or is it going to turn into a disappointing story? And this is about responsibility. I have an accounting degree amongst all sorts of things, and I have a major in marketing as well. And I have a dim view of some of the aspects of consumerism and marketing and media. That doesn't mean it can't do great things, but you need to be thinking about what is that client's story, and not only the client in front of you, but then the community that client lives in. What stories are we creating? Because stories are all we have. And it's important to share our stories. We don't share our stories enough. We're taught to hold on to our stories because we're not that magnificent. Every one of you is magnificent. Our old people say, we're conceived in love, we're born in love. We live in love, we go back to love. You don't have to prove yourself to anybody. You are perfect the way you were born. Your challenge is to embrace your footsteps and walk your footsteps and live a good story. So I'll share a little bit about my story. 34 years of age, 3 kids under 5, wonderful wife, 2 cars, a house in country with water views. I was the marketing manager at a university and I also lectured in economics. Sounds a pretty successful story. But on the day of my 35th birthday, I started crying in the workplace, knew something wasn't right, got home, curled up in a fetal position in a bed and stayed there for 3 months in tears. I was having what was called those days a nervous breakdown. I had depression, agoraphobia, anxiety, panic attacks. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't leave the house, couldn't talk on the phone, couldn't drive a car. The only place I could go to was to the medical profession to seek help, and all the different medicos told me, when I said, how do I fix this? They said, this is unfixable. I said, how do I cure this? They said, it can't be cured, you probably will never work again. And I thought, wow, that's not a good story at all. What am I going to do about this? And I looked at my wife and I thought, she's only 30, the kids are under 5. They don't deserve this cripple hanging onto them, holding back their lives. So I walked down the road to kill myself on a particular day. And as I was about to, this thought came to me. It said, hey, maybe you don't have to believe what others are saying. Maybe you can turn this around, and that's what I did. Maybe you can show others the way, and that's what I did. And what I decided to do was to start walking my footsteps and living my story, and that's what I do to this day. The old me was trying to become the old me. I thought, I just want to be the old me. But with culture, I went way past that and became the real me. And that's the challenge for all of you. Are you being the real you? If great, a big tick. If you're not, have a think about that. So the last comment I want to make in, once I became the real me, I became very successful in terms of leadership. I got all these positions that I didn't want. And so now when I look back, in terms of what is good leadership, I want to challenge you with this. What good leadership is, a good leader creates great stories all around them, in their team, in their workplace, in their family, in their community, across the globe. So the question for you is, are you creating great stories in what you do? Because that is the Nurempa. I create great stories. And part of that, tapping into comments about we need to look at data. Data is backward looking. Convert it to wisdom and you become future-looking. Be wise leaders. Create the future that's a better future. And I get augmented reality. I love my smart TV, but have a think about that. I love a sunset and I love watching flowers bloom. So let's also make sure that we augment reality with reality and teach our kids about reality and be a real leader. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
We will hear from Nayaj Blanchard Dunn. Nayaj is Quandamuka Bundawung woman who works with Phil and I.
Thanks, Amanda. So I often still get those odd looks when people ask me, well, what nationality are you? And I tell them I'm Aboriginal, you know, being fair-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde-haired. But the truth is that my Aboriginal heritage runs so much deeper than just the surface and the colour of my skin. So I'm Nayaj, and some of you might be wondering, well, where does that name come from? It's actually a backwards play on my grandmother's name, Jean. And as Amanda mentioned, I'm a proud Quandamuka and Budawang woman, with my ancestry residing in the North Queensland coast, so North Stradbroke Island, and also the New South Wales South Coast. So I'm a very loved daughter to two beautiful parents who I had the privilege of learning the philosophy of land, spirit, and people. But I'm also a granddaughter, I'm an auntie, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, a partner, a colleague, you know, sports partnerships executive as my profession, and also a university graduate. But more importantly, I'm an advocate, I'm a voice, and I'm an embodiment of my ancestry. So what is the story that we tell people when they ask, well, tell me a bit about yourself? And I bet some people probably almost wanted to run for the door when they get asked that question, because while this should be the easiest thing that we have to answer, it's often the most difficult because we are always so focused on what we think people want to hear about us rather than the truth that we actually want to express. So when I think about my own ancestry, I visualise the story. You know, I see the painting, I hear the song, I watch the dance. You know, and this to me means that one story isn't divided as such, but it's more or less interconnected in, I guess, multiple ways of visualisation. But this makes it both incredibly hard and incredibly rewarding to think about and to visualise. Now, my people went from a population of around 750,000 to 1 million before the first fleet to only 80,000 as of 1880. So that's over 100 years of slaughter, which I'm sure most of us sitting in this room just find it unimaginable. But it's with stories like this that I not only hear this from my ancestry, but I hear the wails of the women as the men were murdered. I watch the destruction of our Mother Earth. And I also see the tears in the eyes of my ancestors as their lives as they knew it were completely in ruins. But in saying that, I also hear celebration, and I see the elation in the eyes of my ancestors, and I watch as they accomplish triumph after triumph despite the intergenerational trauma that impinges them. So take the Mabo decision of 1992, for example, where the High Court finally recognised that Australia belonged to the First Nations people. Or Margaret William Ware, so she was the first Aboriginal woman to complete her university degree, which set up a really long line of educational opportunities for my people. And more recently, the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which is essentially calling on all Australians to support the change in the Constitution, you know, that will allow a First Nations voice to actually make decisions for our people. But it's this kind of open dialogue, while sometimes harsh to hear, that breaks down barriers in having open conversations. You know, it creates questions, creates engagement, learning. You know, and all these parts are so key in fostering deep and meaningful relationships with one another. And this isn't just done by one, this is done by a collective. And it's done by each and every single one of you in this room, just by sitting here and giving that ear to listen to us share. You know, I was extremely lucky when I grew up. I dodged a lot of racial vilification, given that I had very good access to education through my parents. You know, I had my parents' guidance, and also because of the colour of my skin. You know, but along my journey through life, I've also met a lot of First Nations people who weren't so lucky, and who truly suffered at the hands of the inequalities that we have here, and also at the hands of the intergenerational trauma that's right here in our backyard. But it is also because of those stories that I've heard and lived with these people, and also their triumph, I guess, over these hardships, that I have even any sort of confidence to stand up in front of a crowd like this today and share my own truth with you all. So I guess our culture has continued to exist for over 60,000 years, and this has all been through the power of storytelling. So I ask, how do you give a platform for storytelling in your own organisations? How do you give a space for sharing within the workplace? Is it an open forum? Do you guys create a space of humility and for comfort, where no one's story is better than one another's and where everyone feels that equal share of voice? I'd say let's try and fulfill this, and let's continue to walk together in story.
We now welcome Jake and hear his story. Jake is a Wiradjuri man and is the National Head of Aboriginal Health and Television.
Thank you. I can't sing or dance like Uncle Paul, but I am a Wiradjuri Gibba and I belong to what's called Billa Galari. Billa in the Wiradjuri language means river, and Galari or Kalera has been the lifeline for my people since time immemorial. So I want to pay my respect and acknowledge the first people who have cared for Mother Earth since the beginning of time. I also want to pay my respect and acknowledge Uncle Paul and any other Aboriginal elder in here, because without you guys, I don't get to live the life I get to live. And that's what I'm going to share with you a little bit today, a little condensed version of my family story. I'm going to start with my grandmother. My grandmother was a beautiful woman. She was born on the banks of the river that my people belong to. Not long after her birth, they were moved to what's called the Arambi 32 Acres Mission. A mission or a reserve is where Aboriginal people were placed so they could live and learn the ways of Christianity. My grandmother had fond memories of growing up on the mission, but unfortunately for her, her 4 brothers were removed as part of the Protection Board and the White Australia policy. She also placed a really high importance on me and my 54 first cousins, yes, 54, first cousins, the importance of education. And the reason being, as I got older, I learned my grandmother was removed from school in year 4 because she was Aboriginal. Fast forward to my mother. My mother was born in March of 1967. Hands up if anyone recalls or has heard of the referendum in 1967. A couple of people. What that referendum sort of essentially meant was Aboriginal people would not only be counted in the census, but would be counted as human beings. So my mother still has a yellow card that signifies that she belonged to the state as flora and fauna and was considered an animal. Myself, I grew up really lucky in a room very similar to this, very multicultural, and I had no issues or qualms being an Aboriginal person until my very first day of high school. I was walking to class and some kid asked me if I was an Abo. And I looked at him and said, "No, man, I'm Aboriginal." He sort of giggled and smirked and said, "No, you're Abo." I didn't think too much of it. And I remember I got home from school that day and my mum was peeling potatoes in the sink, and I said, "Mum, what does it mean when someone calls you an Abo?" She couldn't even look at me. She dropped the potato and she dropped the peelers, and tears started streaming down her face. It wasn't until then that I realised that was the first time I'd ever experienced racism. But that's something my mother and my family had fought since as long as I can remember. And myself, I was in a very fortunate position. I come from a very strong family. You can see in the back here, my family were the founding members of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, the Aboriginal Legal Service, the first Aboriginal Medical Service, and a lot of the civil rights movements for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And another photo I've got up there, although I do look a bit slimmer in that image, is of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. And the reason that image is there, not because I look good in it, but because it is the 50th anniversary of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy. And right now, there's a new movement for Aboriginal people and also our country. And the reason I share with you my story, because my story is the story of Aboriginal people. And the story of the Aboriginal people is the story of Australia. This is our history. And everybody in this room here today, you guys play a significant role in creating change for not only Aboriginal people, but for Australia. And it's pretty fitting that the event's called, Make the Change, because that's what I believe you guys have the opportunity to do each and every single day, is to learn about my culture, as I said, which is your culture, which is our culture. And I implore you to be the change that you want to see in the world, not for yourself, but for my people who have fought inequality for as long as I can remember. Thank you.
Thank you. If we had unlimited time, we could sit here for hours listening to all of you. I hope you all feel super inspired to walk away and take the opportunity to stop, reflect, and consciously build your own story, similar to Phil, who trusted her gut instincts and followed her calling to the bush to build her life. Hearing from Paul, I've learnt through this process that knowledge has no value if it's not shared. Story must be shared. And we should be more confident. I'm much more comfortable hearing other people's stories than telling my own. But I'll make an effort to be a little bit more prouder of my own story, because my story goes beyond me. Your story goes beyond you. The story doesn't change from generations to generations. It remains pure so that the message stays strong. And hearing from Jake makes me reflect on what my role is in the bigger picture. What's our collective responsibility to influence generations to come, not just with what we do at work, but also within our communities? And I want to be more conscious of how I live and work, and I hope you take that away today. So leaving today, I hope we all listen to learn and practice to really be open and mindful of other people's stories and get a better understanding on how we communicate with each other. Because if we have a better understanding of who someone is, we have a better way of working together, and it's important for us to connect. So we've really enjoyed sharing this with you all. Thank you for being part of it, and we hope that you walk away sharing a little bit of the story and knowledge with your friends and family. Thank you.